Social media is an alternative media that provides a platform for persons to voice themselves. In the case of Sudan, activists use social media platforms to report on political developments and protests, as heavy censorship by the Sudanese government create media blackouts. Both the secession of South Sudan and the loss of $2.5 billion in revenue, the government of Sudan introduced harsh austerity measures as a counterbalance. But with the growing economic hardship, Sudanese mobilized in June 2012 and demanded the ruling party to step down after 23 years in power.
Country Sudan has really hit rock bottom, and things cannot get any worse than what they are now. And I think after 23 years of oppression and injustice, poverty, crime that are all committed under the current regime, change now is an inevitable must.
Protests in Khartoum are not covered by traditional media because of strict censorship laws in Sudan. In fact, messages similar to that of Osama Mahmoud, a Sudanese political activist, are uploaded on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, but are also sent to shows like The Stream and The Listening Post on Al Jazeera English.
Today, the death of 4 students has led to another round of protests in Sudan. But will the demonstrations create political change? It's a story that you've asked us to cover. Of course, I already mentioned that our community asked us to cover Sudan revolts, and they did so using social media, which is also how we've been following many of the developments in this story.
Such shows rely heavily on social media as a source of information. Activist and blogger Carol Jean Gallo explains why social media is important.
Another thing that is making international coverage really difficult is the media blackout in Sudan itself, because national news sources aren't allowed to cover the protests, and a lot of newspapers have been shut down because of censorship. And so the social media aspect of this is really important because it gives a really important platform for the activists to tell their story.
Human rights activist and member of a grassroots movement, Girifna, Dalia Al-Haj explains the uses of social media.
Girifna's movement, grassroots efforts on the ground. We try to use social media, the internet, video to reach out to a larger audience, especially that in Sudan there's a huge problem of access to information of what's happening inside the country.
Despite the importance of social media in Sudan, it is only used by a small percentage of the population. Nisreen Al-Malik, a Sudanese-British journalist for The Guardian, explains why.
There are a few reasons. One is that internet penetration is relatively new to the country. The uptake has been quite slow. It's in the major cities. Internet is available, but the way people use it is still very much in terms of sending out emails and kind of basic internet communication, as opposed to using it as a way of gathering in a community. But also because the way the country is set up in terms of community, it's much less fragmented than in the more developed Arab countries. Egypt and Tunisia are relatively more developed than Sudan. It's much more urbanized, it's much more atomized, whereas community is still quite strong in Sudan. And so people feel less of a need to gather in a virtual community because they have a real live one.
However, Al-Malik explains that social media can be used for social activism in the future.
I think in Sudan it will play an important role insofar as it will be the first point of contact. People will gather and create an event, and then it can spread by word of mouth to those who aren't exposed to the internet. And so I think that even though internet penetration is low, even though people have kind of a disdain of social media and not really taken seriously, there will be a hardcore group of people who continue to use it. But in terms of social media creating a steady, permanent momentum from which these protests can take off, I don't think it's likely. The other role it might play, if it's via Twitter, is it will get the message out to the outside world.
Therefore, it can be said that the influence of social media in Sudan is still in its embryonic stages, but its use is not to mobilize people, but rather to connect them to the online global community in order to convey developments on the ground. The media blackout in Sudan might be the reason for the low coverage of the still ongoing protests in Sudan, but perhaps another reason might be that Sudan is simply not on the global political agenda.